It was another long morning inside the warehouse. The sound of forklifts hummed in the background, and boxes were being shifted from one aisle to another. The worker, a man who had spent years in that building, wore his faded uniform and steel-toed boots that had carried him through countless shifts. He knew every corner of the warehouse like the back of his hand. The job was tough, the pay wasn't great, but he did it with a sense of responsibility because it kept food on the table for his family. He didn't complain much, but deep inside, he often wondered if anyone really noticed the hard work people like him put in every day. That morning, as he was stacking inventory, he heard a noise that didn't fit with the usual rhythm of the warehouse. It wasn't the slam of a pallet or the squeak of machinery, it was something different, something human. He looked up and saw a customer on the floor near the entrance. The man was older, clutching his side, struggling to breathe. Without even thinking, the worker dropped what he was holding and rushed over. His heart pounded as he knelt down and tried to keep the customer calm. The man was pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. The worker spoke softly, telling him help was on the way. He quickly called out to another employee to grab the first aid kit and dial emergency services. Time seemed to stretch in that moment. The warehouse was a place built for moving goods, not for saving lives, but here was a life that needed saving. The worker loosened the man's collar, checked that his airway was clear, and tried to comfort him until the ambulance arrived. His hands trembled, not from fear of doing the wrong thing, but from the weight of the responsibility he suddenly carried. Other customers stopped to watch, whispering about what was happening. A few pulled out their phones, recording the scene. The worker didn't notice. His focus was only on the injured man, whose breathing slowly steadied under his care. When the paramedics finally arrived, they took over, asking what had happened. The worker quickly explained everything he had done, and the professionals nodded, saying he acted fast and may have prevented something worse. Relief washed over him as he stood back and let them do their job. The injured man was lifted onto a stretcher, and before being taken away, he reached out weakly and squeezed the worker's hand, mouthing the words "thank you." It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world. As the ambulance doors closed, the worker expected some sort of acknowledgement from his manager, maybe even a nod of approval. After all, he had just stepped in when it mattered most. Instead, what came next stunned him. The manager, red-faced and frowning, pulled him aside and barked at him for leaving his assigned area. He reminded him of the company rule, never abandon your post without permission. The worker tried to explain there hadn't been time to wait for instructions, someone was hurt and needed help. But the manager was unmoved. Rules were rules, he said coldly, and they existed for a reason. The words cut deeper than the worker expected. He had always believed that doing the right thing should count for something, especially in an emergency. But now he stood there, feeling small and humiliated, as if compassion itself was a mistake. His co-workers looked on, some with sympathy, others with fear, knowing they too could face punishment if they ever dared to act outside the rigid lines of company policy. By the end of the shift, the worker was called into the office. His stomach tightened as he walked in, sensing what was coming. The manager sat behind the desk, papers neatly stacked as though preparing for an official statement. With barely a glance of emotion, the manager told him he was being let go, effective immediately. His act of kindness, his quick thinking, and his willingness to put another person first, none of it mattered in the eyes of the company's rules. He was handed a slip and told to turn in his badge. Just like that, years of service were erased with a few words. He walked out of the warehouse in silence, his belongings tucked into a small box. The afternoon sun felt harsher than usual as he stepped into the parking lot. He climbed into his old car, gripped the steering wheel, and sat there for a while without turning on the engine. Thoughts swirled in his head. How would he tell his family? What would they think? He hadn't been fired for slacking, or for stealing, or for breaking safety procedures. He had been fired for helping someone in need. It was almost too absurd to believe. On the drive home, every red light seemed to mock him, every billboard showing cheerful workers felt like an insult. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind: the injured man, the frantic calls for help, the relief when the paramedics arrived. None of it felt wrong. In fact, it felt like the only thing a decent human being could do. But now, he was left with no job, no income, and the heavy burden of explaining to his family that their future had just been shaken. When he walked through the door, his children ran up to him, unaware of what had happened, asking if he wanted to play or help with homework. His wife noticed his expression right away, and the smile on her face faded. He sat down at the kitchen table and told her everything. Her eyes widened with disbelief as she listened. She couldn't understand how a company could punish someone for showing kindness. She reached across the table, holding his hand, telling him he did the right thing. Yet, he still felt the sting of failure, as though doing right had somehow ruined them. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressed down on him. The bills stacked on the counter were not going to wait. The rent was due soon. His kids had school expenses. He worried about what kind of example he was setting, what lesson his children would take from watching their father punished for helping someone. He wanted to believe that good deeds still mattered in the world, but right then, it felt like the opposite was true. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was broken, filled with restless dreams of flashing ambulance lights and stern voices telling him he was wrong. By morning, he rose with heavy eyes and a heavy heart. The warehouse job that had once given him stability was gone, and in its place was uncertainty. He wondered if the injured customer was okay. He wondered if anyone had noticed the unfairness of what happened. He couldn't have known, in that quiet moment, that the story of his actions was already spreading far beyond the walls of the warehouse, and that his life was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. The day after the worker was fired began quietly, but storms often start in silence. Somewhere in the city, a young woman who had been inside the warehouse during the incident opened her phone. She had seen everything: the worker running to help, the older customer struggling, and the shocking way the manager scolded him afterward. She had even recorded parts of it on her phone. She couldn't believe what she had witnessed, and when she later learned from another employee that the man had been fired, she felt anger rise inside her. Without hesitation, she wrote a long post on social media, explaining in detail what had happened. She described how a worker risked his job to save a man in distress and was punished for it. Then she uploaded the video clip. At first, the post only reached her small circle of friends, but within minutes, it began to spread. People commented with disbelief. Some said things like, "How could a company be so heartless?" Others shared it to their own pages, and within hours, the story started traveling far beyond her town. By afternoon, the post had tens of thousands of shares, and people from different states were now adding their voices. Words like injustice and heartless corporation filled the comment sections. Local reporters soon noticed. One journalist, known for covering community stories, reached out to the woman who made the post and asked for permission to use her video. She agreed, and by that evening, the story appeared on a small news site. The headline read, "Worker fired after helping injured customer." The article detailed the event, quoting witnesses, and even mentioning that the injured customer was recovering in the hospital. It also included screenshots of the manager yelling at the worker. The injured customer himself, lying in a hospital bed, heard about the story. When a nurse told him the man who had helped him had lost his job, his face fell. He insisted on giving an interview to set the record straight. With oxygen tubes still by his side, he spoke to a local reporter about how grateful he was to the worker. He explained that in those critical moments, it was the warehouse worker who calmed him, helped him breathe, and likely prevented something much worse before the ambulance arrived. His words were emotional and honest, and when the clip was broadcast on local television that night, it struck a chord with everyone watching. Meanwhile, the worker sat at home with his family. He had no idea the story was spreading. He was too busy worrying about the future, about how to find another job quickly, about how to keep things steady for his children. He avoided the television that night, not wanting reminders of the warehouse. But his phone kept buzzing. At first, it was a friend who texted him, "Hey, is this you in the news?" Then another message came, then more. Confused, he opened his phone and saw dozens of notifications. Links to posts, articles, and videos filled his screen. His wife sat next to him, reading over his shoulder, and gasped as she saw the video clip of him helping the injured man. The caption above the video read, "Hero fired for doing the right thing." His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled. Strangers were calling him a hero. People were demanding the company reinstate him. Thousands of comments poured in, most of them supportive. He didn't know whether to feel proud, shocked, or overwhelmed. All he had done was what any decent person should do. By the next morning, the story had reached bigger news outlets. National networks began calling it a case of corporate cruelty. Talk shows debated whether companies had lost touch with basic human decency. Social media hashtags appeared, calling for justice for the warehouse worker. Some posts even encouraged boycotts of the company until they corrected their mistake. It was as if an invisible army of voices had suddenly taken up his cause. Reporters began showing up outside his small house, knocking on the door, asking for comments. At first, he hesitated, unsure if speaking out would help or hurt. But then he remembered how the truth had already traveled far on its own. So, he stepped onto his porch and spoke simply. He told them he didn't regret helping the injured man, even if it had cost him his job. His words were not rehearsed, not polished, but they were genuine. Cameras captured the sincerity in his voice, the honesty in his eyes. That night, his short statement aired on national news. The impact was immediate. Thousands more rallied behind him, praising his courage. His story inspired debates in workplaces everywhere. People shared their own experiences of being punished for doing the right thing, and they compared notes about how companies often cared more about rules than people. His story became a symbol, something bigger than just one worker or one warehouse. Back at the corporate headquarters, executives watched the unfolding disaster with alarm. Their public relations team was swamped with angry emails and phone calls. Their social media accounts were flooded with negative comments. News anchors called them out live on air. The silence from the company only made it worse. For the first time in years, stockholders began raising questions, worried that public trust was slipping away. The injured customer, still recovering, gave another interview. This time, his voice carried more strength. He said clearly that the worker should be honored, not punished. He told the world that he owed his safety to the quick actions of that man, and that firing him was nothing short of shameful. That interview went viral too, turning the wave of outrage into a tidal force. The worker and his family sat together watching some of the coverage. His children, who didn't fully understand the details, asked why people on TV were calling their dad a hero. He smiled at them, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. Pride because they saw him as someone brave, sadness because it had taken a firing for people to notice. He hugged them close, telling them that sometimes life takes strange turns, but doing the right thing is always worth it. He never imagined that by simply acting on instinct to help another person, he would become the center of a national conversation. Yet here he was, an ordinary man whose story was spreading everywhere. And as the day ended, he began to realize that something bigger was coming. The voices of thousands were demanding action, and corporations, no matter how powerful, could not ignore such a storm forever. The morning after the worker's quiet statement on his porch, the story had already spread far beyond his small town. Newspapers in big cities ran the headline across their front pages. Television anchors repeated his words again and again, "I don't regret helping him. I'd do it again." People who had never met him felt they knew him, felt they understood what he stood for. He wasn't famous, he wasn't rich, but he had become a symbol of something people everywhere recognized: decency punished by power. At corporate headquarters, the mood was tense. The building, usually buzzing with confidence and the rhythm of meetings, now felt heavy. Inside a large glass conference room, executives sat around a long table, their faces grim. Screens on the walls showed news channels running the story non-stop. One of the vice presidents slammed his palm on the table, saying the company was being torn apart in the public eye. The head of public relations explained that their social media feeds were overflowing with angry comments, too many for the team to even keep up with. Emails from customers poured in, some threatening to never shop with them again. The CEO, usually calm and steady, leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. He asked for updates on the stock price. The finance officer hesitated before answering. Shares had already taken a hit since the news broke. Investors were calling, worried that public anger would hurt profits. To make matters worse, television commentators were now talking about boycotts. What had started as one worker's firing was now threatening the image of the entire company. Meanwhile, in towns across the country, people were still talking about it. In diners, in schools, even in churches, the story came up in conversations. Parents used it as an example for their children, explaining why doing the right thing mattered. Workers in different industries compared their own struggles, sharing how they too had been punished for showing kindness or for bending a rule in order to help someone. The warehouse worker's name became known to millions. Back at his home, the worker felt a mix of emotions. He was grateful for the support, but it was overwhelming. Reporters kept calling, neighbors kept stopping by, and letters from strangers arrived in his mailbox. Some included gift cards, some included handwritten notes thanking him for being brave. One letter came from a retired nurse who wrote that what he did reminded her of the importance of compassion in every job. Another came from a firefighter, saying he wished more people had the same instinct to help first and worry about rules later. The worker read them all quietly, sometimes with tears in his eyes. But he also felt the weight of the unknown. Would any of this help him find a job again? Would the company apologize, or would they just move on and forget? His wife encouraged him to stay strong, reminding him that the truth was on his side. Still, the uncertainty lingered. By afternoon, news vans lined the street near his home. A bigger national channel wanted to do a live interview. He agreed, sitting on his porch once again, his children peeking from the window as cameras pointed at him. The anchor asked if he thought the company should take him back. He answered simply that it wasn't about getting his job back, it was about making sure no one else was punished for doing the right thing. His honesty struck viewers again, and within hours, clips of his interview spread online with captions like, "The voice of integrity." The company could no longer ignore it. Another emergency meeting was called that evening. Executives argued fiercely. Some said they should issue a statement defending the manager's decision, that rules existed for safety and discipline. Others insisted that holding firm would only destroy the company's image further. The head of marketing pointed out that every hour of silence was costing them money and trust. Finally, the CEO raised his hand and silenced the room. He told them the situation had gone far beyond a simple policy dispute. It was now a matter of values, and the public saw them as standing on the wrong side. Something dramatic had to be done, not just a press release. In the workers' town, the injured customer had recovered enough to give another statement. With determination in his voice, he said that he owed his safety to the man who helped him. He described how he had felt himself slipping, how panic had overtaken him, and how the worker's calm voice and steady hands gave him hope until the ambulance arrived. His words were carried by every major news outlet. The public now saw the worker not just as someone who had done the right thing, but as someone who had directly saved a life. The company's decision looked harsher with every passing hour. In coffee shops, strangers debated about corporate rules versus human decency. On talk shows, experts discussed how policies should never stand in the way of compassion. Hashtags calling for justice for the worker stayed at the top of social media trends for a second straight day. Even politicians started to weigh in, saying companies should remember the human side of business. The worker himself remained humble through it all. When asked if he was angry at the manager who fired him, he shook his head. "I don't hold grudges," he said softly. "I just wish things had been different. People shouldn't be afraid to help someone in need." His words only added to the public respect for him. Late that night, far from his modest home, the executives at headquarters made a decision. They would not only bring him back, they would make a public display of it. They knew they had to act fast, before more damage was done. Arrangements were made in secret. Calls were placed, plans drawn. A company jet would be sent to bring him face to face with the leadership. It wasn't just about rehiring him anymore, it was about saving the company's name. The worker, lying awake in his small bedroom, had no idea of the storm gathering in boardrooms,